There are select few things in this world that actually do live up to the hype. Whataburger, visiting Oklahoma, and being in a committed, loving relationship with someone have all personally failed to be as cool and nice as one would think. But you know what does live up to the hype? Remote-controlled gun turrets. In fact, I would argue that these are verging on super weapon level status, but everyone seems to be more focused on jetpacks and making rifles tan-colored. So I want to give this little guy the attention he deserves. Remote-controlled weapons are all biological males, by the way. But my goal with this video is to explain that these kinds of systems are actually way better and way scarier than you probably realize, and they're only getting crazier as time goes on. We'll be covering everything from the simplest to the most complex in this video, so let's get started. If you didn't know, for some reason, there are things called turrets on top of military vehicles, and the way you mount a gun in said turret turns into a tricky game of pros and cons. Bigger gun, better firepower, more weight, and usually more complex to operate. Smaller gun, simpler, usually carries more ammo, but not a ton of bang for your buck. If you put more armor into the turret, you lessen the chance that whichever guy you put up there gets schwacked, but it makes the vehicle heavier and raises the center of gravity, which increases the chance of a rollover. Being in a turret during a vehicle rollover is a good way to make it so that the only thing they have to identify your body is that weird mole you have on the inside of your thigh. That's right, I knew about that, and you should get it looked at by specialists. The give and take of manned turrets is usually a trade-off of how much gun can an actual person handle on a mount, and is added protection for the poor guy up there worth the trade-offs on the whole vehicle and everyone else inside of it? Now, between researching unmanned turrets and getting bullied in my comment section, I have been playing a lot of Raid Shadow Legends, and I can promise you nothing will help take your mind off of mean people on the internet more than Raid's latest global event, Alice's Adventures, where you can get 5 brand spanking new legendary champions. And if you've ever wondered what it would be like if Alice in Wonderland was way cooler and involved flaming swords, well, now is your time. And all you have to do is boot up Raid Shadow Legends 14 times before March 26th. And you'll unlock her and a 2-star perfect soul. Plus, you can unlock the Queen of Hearts, the Knave of Hearts, the Mad Hatter, and the Cheshire Cat. Right now is absolutely the best time to start playing, so you can take advantage of the insane amount of legendaries available for unlocking by participating in the in-game events. If you download Raid Shadow Legends today using my link below or the QR code, not only will you get to play with me and the legendary clan Beans Tavy, but you'll unlock a massive epic champion ultimate Galek from the Orcs faction. And you'll get another starter pack after reaching level 15 that includes an epic Fayne, who is honestly a better champion than some legendaries in my opinion. And if you use my link in conjunction with the promo code Monkey King, you'll get the legendary champion Sun Wukong. The weather where I live has been less than ideal, but I've been using this as an opportunity to play as much Raid as humanly possible, and upgrading my champions, defeating enemies, and collecting that sweet, sweet loot, which is personally my favorite thing to do in games. But to take advantage of all these offers, you have to use my link or the QR code and promo code Monkey King, and you'll get an instant head start ahead of everyone else. And make sure you join the clan, because my New Year's resolution was to at least make one friend. But that's when someone had the grand idea of just letting computers and electronics do all the hard work for us. What we would consider today as unmanned guns really started popping off in the 80s, with the introduction of the first real remote weapon system, the Samson RWS from Israel. And the fact that this weapon first came from Israel makes a lot of sense. If you look at Israeli vehicle and weapon design, they are generally 1, created with a focus of dense urban combat in mind, and 2, prioritize soldier and crew survivability above almost everything else. All you need to do is look at that one Humvee scene from Black Hawk Down to know that being in a lightly armored manned turret surrounded by multi-level buildings is not a good time. The idea behind the Samson and really any RWS that we're going to be talking about in this video is pretty simple. Attach your machine gun of choice onto a controllable arm, connect your favorite flavor of camera for targeting, and wire it all to a control system inside the vehicle. The obvious benefit of this is that instead of being exposed and making yourself target numero uno to any bad guys, you're now sitting pretty inside of the vehicle itself. But that's just one. There's actually way more upsides to this. The first is better maneuverability of the gun. Most gunners popping out of holes have to either manually traverse the turret, which is slow and imprecise, or use a motorized system, which is better but still leaves a lot to be desired. Secondly, if you actually have to sit in the turret, you can only point the gun up so high and still be able to fire accurately. If you combine the fact that the higher an angle someone has on you that they're attacking you from, it kind of turns into a double whammy in that case. depending model and weapon type, even the earliest RWS systems churned out let you engage targets accurately, with some at an 80-degree point of elevation. That said, if you need a full 90 degrees of elevation, I don't really know what to tell you. The universe is just working against you at that point. But the shift from these manned turrets to these remote-controlled turrets cannot be overstated as how big a leap in capabilities it actually was. The sheer simplicity of aiming with a camera and applying fine adjustments with a joystick blows absolutely everything else out of the water, especially when you consider that the mounted arm holding the gun does a much better job of absorbing recoil, and the camera being on the mount instead of on the gun helps keep sights on target instead of giving you epilepsy from your red dot slamming all over the place. A lot of this comes from the fact that these mounts are stabilized, meaning regardless of how the vehicle is moving, the gun barrel stays pointed at the same place. This means that if you want to actually shoot anything with the tiniest morsel of accuracy, you don't have to stop the vehicle to do so. Normally, if you play any kind of military video game shooter type thing, everything in the video game is significantly easier than it is in real life. Reloading takes half a second, even while you're sprinting full tilt. You can eject from your fighter with a machine gun you had shoved up your prison wallet, and getting your socks wet doesn't cause an existential crisis. You get the picture. But have you ever used a remote weapon system in a video game? Because if you have, it's basically the one exception because it's even easier in real life. That is how scary these things are. One of the biggest reasons for this is that these remote weapon systems have built-in ballistic computers to do all the hard work for you. In a video game, for example, you generally have to do something like lead and arc your shots to account for bullet drop or the target moving in a certain direction. In real life, you don't actually have to do any of that. This comes from a combination of laser range finding, inertial tracking, and just a little bit of math. The laser rangefinder uses a laser to find the range. Wow. But we know the speed of light, so however long it takes for the laser to hit the target and bounce back, that gives us the range. Then the system will raise or lower the gun as necessary to account for bullet drop, but it still keeps the reticle on target for easier aiming. If the gunner is traversing left, right, up, or down with the target moving, then the gun knows how fast that target is going because of the shift in angle and the known distance from the rangefinder. Then, depending on what kind of weapon and ammo you're using, it leads the gun for you. So, unlike in video games, in real life, all you have to do is keep the reticle on target. And fancy overpriced computers do all the ballistic guesswork for you. One of the most overpowered parts of these kinds of systems, and really any big gun that goes boom, isn't always the gun itself. A lot of the times, it's the camera. Acquiring targets manually with just your eyeballs or a set of binos obviously is not impossible. And turret gunners generally have really good situational awareness that you actually lose the second you hunker down in the hole, but it's not great. Things like dust clouds if you're in a convoy, dense foliage, a dude's camouflage, long ranges, or just the fact that literally half the time the sun isn't out, that all makes it harder to visually acquire targets and aim properly. Not only do the majority of these gun systems have really impressive levels of zoom to see far away, most of the time they're also thermal imagers, and if you've ever used thermals in any kind of gun shooting sense, you know that they are just cheating. Take this video that I took myself as an example. This is a cow being chased off of a firing range we were training at. As you can see here, clearly is cow and clearly is Humvee chasing off said cow so we don't accidentally make hamburgers. This cow was almost 2 miles away, and this video was taken on a moonless dark night. So even if I did have the best night vision in the world, I probably would not have seen that cow without any kind of thermal overlay. Not only that, but most laser rangefinders these days will give you an accurate grid location to whatever you're painting with to an accuracy of 1 to 10 meters generally. So now you don't even have to get into position to engage a target. You can just keep yourself nice and concealed and call in artillery instead. The ability to ID targets with thermals has been one of the biggest game changers in the last few decades of warfare. Half the reason Desert Storm was such a cakewalk was the fact that Iraqi tanks had literally no way of identifying coalition forces when the sun went down. For us Americanos, the RWS you're probably most familiar for is the Common Remotely Operated Weapon Station, or CROWS. These first began being used in 2004 in Iraq as the M101 CROWS, developed by Recon Optical, but was replaced a few years later by the M153 CROWS by Kongsberg Protec Systems in a joint Norwegian and American development effort. To date, over 18,000 of these have been fielded by the United States and are used in every single branch on pretty much every vehicle you can imagine. One fun development was the creation of the CROWS J system, which is your standard M153 fitted to also fire javelin rounds. You'll find these mostly on strikers, with the Army's plan being to upgrade half of their strikers with 30mm cannons and the other half with the Crow's J system. One thing I do think is funny that is stressed whenever you look up specs of the Crow system is that the laser rangefinder is eye safe so that you don't accidentally cause some discomfort to the person you're about to go send to meet St. Peter. Especially considering there is a version of the Crows that has a laser dazzler, which is specifically for blinding people. War crime, by the way. Abrams tanks use a slightly different system, that being the Low Profile Protector RWS, which holds the commander's M2. Older RWS systems worked fine, but basically blocked the commander's entire view, which I feel like I shouldn't have to say, but is a bad thing. But there's one system to the Crows in a lot of these RWSs, and that is they can only hold so much gun. These days, the biggest gun you're going to find on these outside of a javelin launcher is going to be a 50 cal or Mark 19 grenade launcher. Not that I would enjoy being shot by either of those, but sometimes you have targets that just need a little bit more oomph to take them down. My choice to use Canadians for that bit of footage was both intentional and prophetic. So what do we do about this problem of not enough gun? Well, while everyone was trying to figure out the whole RWS thing, countries were also playing their hand at making actual tank-style turrets unmanned as well. And there are two major benefits to having this kind of system on your tank, or whatever vehicle you slap it on. First is that it makes you a significantly smaller target. Manned turrets need physical space for crew to do their thing. Make the turret self-contained, and now it doesn't have to be as big, meaning you are smaller. Vehicles generally try to only expose their turrets to targets, meaning it's one of the most common places to get hit. If you have no one in the turret and it goes kaboom, your now unemployed gunner still gets to go home instead of having to experience a brief feeling of what it's like to be on the surface of the sun. Secondly is that unmanned turrets use auto-loaders, which means you don't gotta train someone up on how to load rounds into the breech. Now, there are pros and cons to auto-loaders, and they're just as common in manned turrets as ones with manned loaders, but it's generally seen as a plus in this case. But big auto-loaders for self-contained turrets have historically been a little tricky. If you read about almost every prototype unmanned tank or large caliber gun turret, it almost always has a section exclusively talking about issues with the autoloader. These can be a bit of hard engineering to get right, and in an unmanned turret, if the autoloader breaks, you don't have the option of manually firing or at the very least fixing it easily because the whole thing is self-contained. Russia is hedging its bets that it has this part figured out on their unmanned turret on the T-14 with its 125mm cannon, so we'll see once they decide it's had enough parade practice. But the most common development we've seen with unmanned style turrets is using medium caliber autocannons slapped onto already existing vehicles. Like 30mm on Dragoons, dual cannons on BMPTs, and now even unmanned mortar launchers on the new AMP-Vs. By doing this, you're not only avoiding having to build an entirely new vehicle to get a better weapon system, but more than anything, it's an upgrade to what you already have. Now, instead of just a 50 caliber and a Dream, you have a 300mm, typo in the script, 30mm cannon with coaxial machine guns, Stinger anti-air missiles, and a couple of Hellfires, which are more commonly found on things like dedicated attack helicopters. Because the loading mechanisms of chain guns and autocannons are closer to a machine gun than that of a 105mm cannon, ammunition is handled generally in the same way, instead of engineering specific mechanisms to load single rounds in at a time. Reloading these kinds of weapon systems can be a pain in the wiener, but ideally you only have to do it a few times and not very often. These unmanned large caliber turrets have basically almost exclusively surpassed all manned turrets that are currently in use with militaries around the world, which breaks my heart coming from a Bradley guy, but now I am the old man and the future is now. It's starting to look like the days of manned turrets are going away though, with more prototype tanks using unmanned turrets and newer APCs and IFVs basically not even considering the option of manned turrets anymore. It's going to look like death via joystick is the way of the future. And on that bright and shiny note, thank you for watching. Make sure you check out today's partner raid, Shadow Legends. Please subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.